afternoon. It's a pleasure welcoming Dr. Krishnaswamy Dara for an interactive session on democracy and dialogue. Krishnaswamy Dara is a political scientist and currently an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. In 2007, he received his doctorate from the Department of Political Science at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. The thesis titled The Idea of Minority in Ambedkar's Thought, Equality and Differential Rights was supervised by Professor Valerian Rodrigues and was awarded the Best PhD for 2007 by the Nirman Foundation, India. You're welcome, Dr. Dara. You have up to 2 hours for this session, and you're welcome to conduct it however you like to. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. If I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Bezad Atmi. Yes. Thank you very much for inviting me for this interactive session and also present my views on this dialogue studies students group. Thank you for considering me, and I also thank everyone of you in this course for participating in this course. So I do not know what I've seen the syllabus, and I've seen some sections. I don't know what has been covered, what has been discussed before in your course. So I will not assume that a lot of discussion has not taken place, neither I'll assume that a lot of discussion has taken place. So as I'm a student of political science, and we, as students of political science, we are always engaged in dialogue and discussion, and this is part of our, what we say, bread and butter, and also the politics behind dialogue and deliberation and the benefits and the problems with that. So, and also we also deal with the theoretical part of democracy, the practical problems that come with the democracy, and the issues that are related to democracy, not directly, but all the issues that are related to our society problems. So this is our bread and butter as students of political science. I'm not sure how many of you are actually from political science background. So I would like to touch upon many things to come to the point I want to, a kind of clearing I want to do before I start my conversation or my argument or something like that. First of all, I would like to make this distinction between what thinking about politics and thinking politically. This distinction is made by a very famous political scientist called Michael Frieden. I don't know whether you know this name. He's very famous, much more coming from the empirical side of political science. And so thinking about politics is different from thinking politically. So we need to keep this difference in mind. So that because we are all thinking about politics, because politics affects us, politics has a bearing on us. So we are all thinking about politics, but we are also thinking politically also. Thinking politically means evaluating, judging, prioritizing certain values, certain perspectives, certain frameworks. So the weight we give to different values, goals. There's a very famous line that politics is the authoritative allocation of values. I think it is, I don't remember, it is David Actor. So when we are talking about thinking politically, we are making a lot of choices, which are in those choices we are devaluing something, valuing something, prioritizing something, deprioritizing something, and we are mostly conscious of it, and also sometimes we are unconscious about it. So there's a very complex phenomena when we are thinking politically, and also when we are thinking about politics, which is also a subject which we are going to deal with. We are again sometimes mixing or thinking politically with thinking about politics. Generally, thinking about politics is to understand, it's a descriptive understanding about how politics takes place, what is the nature of politics, so and so. But thinking politically is normative in nature, in the sense we are evaluating, we are judging, right? And judgments again are very, very political in that sense. Political judgment is very different from, let us say, all other kinds of judgments. And political judgments are where there's a complex prioritizations and choosings we do, selections we do, deleting something and accepting something in all our judgments. So a political judgment is a very complex judgment, but normatively speaking, judgments are good, because if you say everything is equally good, then there's a problem. Politics, in a sense, is the art, and some people will call it science. Someone like Machiavelli would much more see politics in the sense of an art. Someone like Locke and Hobbes would see more politics as a science. So it's a mixture of both. So when you're speaking it in an art, whenever we make judgments about the world and particularly about politics, we are setting politics to a frame or to a standard. Whenever we put standards, that we call it normative political philosophy or normative philosophy. And so we normally also divide political theory, political science, particularly political theory, between two kinds, what is called ideal political theory and non-ideal political theory. I do not know how many of you know this distinction between ideal political theory and non-ideal political theory. I'm assuming that you don't know. In case of non-ideal political, ideal political theory is, the greatest ideal political theorist is Plato, right? Plato, in his work Republic, he talks about what is an ideal arrangement of people, or what he calls republic. Meant in his time, the word republic means justice. Literally, it means justice. So for him, an ideal framework is where everyone does his or her job, or a job that is suited to their nature. So he divides people into different metals, warrior class, intellectual class, the serf class, and different kinds. So if any class is doing their job according to their nature or their natural endowment, that is considered a just arrangement of society. So this is one of the earliest ideal political theory, where you talk about what an ideal system is. And so a lot of political science, particularly in the last 3 decades, focused on what we call ideal political theory, because it's very, very important to know what the ideal is in order to make a judgment. If you want to say a person is healthy or unhealthy, or he's having fever or not, you need to know what an ideal temperature human body roughly should be. So if the ideal temperature is roughly around 98 degrees, then we can say if the temperature is reaching 100, 100 and above, it's unideal, or if it is reaching below, it's again unideal. So ideals in that sense are what are called regulative ideas. Regulative ideas are ones that we can navigate. When we're navigating, we need what Gandhi would call the pole star. Like pole star helps the ships to navigate to which direction you can go, right? So ideal political theory has been dominating in the last 3 to 4 decades. One of the famous guys we know is John Rawls. I don't know whether you know this name. John Rawls is one of the, in fact, he made ideal political theory look cool. And on the continental side, it is Habermas, who also does to some extent this ideal political theory. In that sense, talking about what are the ideal conditions. In fact, we'll come to this concept of Habermas called ideal speech situation. An ideal speech situation is what is the correct situation in which proper democratic deliberation can take place. So both traditions come from this ideal theory, and it's the importance of ideals. A lot of the time, people reject ideal theory as being utopian, armchair philosophy, or impractical. A lot of labels are attached to this ideal political theory, but I'm one of those who believe that ideal political theory is important, because it's important in order to judge something as good or bad. You need to know what a good is. If your very ideal is bad, then your judgment will have a will not be fair or just. So therefore, that's one part of political science which has focused a lot on ideal political theory. Then there is something called non-ideal political theory, which accepts an ideal and then tries to see what are the requirements, what are the procedures or the problems that one needs to overcome to reach this ideal. So in a sense, it's a division of labor. One set of philosophers, thinkers, political theorists focus on debating on what an ideal is. And this set of philosophers are talking, they don't debate about what the ideal is, they pick up one ideal and talk about how to achieve that ideal. So, for example, take the concept of democracy, right? People can debate about what an ideal democracy is. So if you start debating, soon I'm sure all of you will not agree about what an ideal democracy is. For example, ideal democracy shouldn't be majoritarian, let us say, or we say that ideal democracy should be accountable. This is one of the values. Accountability is important for ideal democracy. So there are different people debating about what a good democracy is, right? It's not that there is a settled world where people have agreed about what democracy is. People are still debating and seriously debating whether is democracy a good idea also or a good bad idea. It's not that democracy is taken for granted as a good idea. So there are people. There's a lot of debates that are happening simultaneously, and therefore one needs to keep this distinction between ideal political theory and non-ideal political theory. Is there any question which I said, anything you have which I said is not clear? So that I can proceed. Is there anything you have any doubt to this distinction? It's not easy for newcomers, for those who don't know. Which means no, right? Shall I proceed?
Sir, I want to ask, can we use transcendental institutionalism of John Rawls, or the way Amartya Sen used the idea of transcendental institutionalism for ideal theory of political philosophy?
Yeah, because use in the sense Rawls is developing this ideal theory. The whole Rawlsian project is ideal political theory, right? He's trying to talk about what is an ideal. Bit of Rawls. You know that what Rawls is claiming is what is an ideal distribution of resources, what he calls distributive justice, right? And the ideal distributive justice, follows two principles of justice, right? One, greatest liberty, and second, the greatest advantage go to the least advantage. Greatest benefits go to the least advantage. Do you know these two principles, Ranjan?
Yes, sir. I know. I'm getting, sir.
So in the same way, this ideal concept is also applied at the international level, right? By Thomas Pogge and others. So yes, in a sense, Rawlsian way of doing theorization is ideal in that sense. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. I got that. Right.
Yeah. Any other?
Sir.
Yes.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, sir. So, sir, you have put a set of different values and principles associated with ideal political theory. So, we just want to know that what about the non-ideal political theory? What are the basic, set of values or other things associated in non-ideal political theory?
Generally, non-ideal political theory is one which accepts an ideal and looks at the issues and problems that one faces or a system faces in reaching that ideal. One, non-ideal political theory is highly empirical in nature. In that sense, it tries to understand the situation. It tries to understand what the problems are, what are the issues are, but it does not debate about what the ideal is. Idealist accepts, but it talks about how do we achieve. For example, if we believe that gender equality is good, and a non-ideal theory talks about how to achieve this gender equality, while ideal theory is debating whether is gender equality good or bad. So non-ideal theory in that sense uses empirical observation. Ideal is generally normative, and empirical is descriptive.
It's like more of realistic in nature.
Yes, you can say it's more realistic in nature, but every word you are using are loaded terms. Realism in international relations knows very well that it's not a neutral term. I would also get to know, do you know the distinction between the famous is-ought distinction? Is-ought and ought distinction. Do you know this is famously made by David Hume, philosopher David Hume. Do you know the distinction?
Sir, I barely recall it. Can you please
I'll just remind you the is question. What are called is question is what is this color of the sky? What is the size of the moon? So when the question is, then the answer is descriptive. Okay, so the size of the moon is this much. The color of the sky is this. But ought is what ought to be the temperature of human body. What ought to be the ideal size for a democracy? What ought to be the values of them? Ought is normative in nature. Ought is normative in nature. So this is what the famous is-ought distinction introduced by David Hume. And in political science, one needs to be careful when you are making an is comment or an ought comment, because sometimes people confuse. So whenever they're commenting about reality, they are actually judging about reality. And when you're judging about reality, you're applying some normative standard. So therefore, reality is this, but it ought to be this, So that is what is called the is-ought distinction. So a lot of non-ideal political theory focuses on the is. And then there is variety of non-ideal theory, which focuses on trying to find what is human political behavior. That's empirical in nature. How do humans actually behave in politics? What is their nature? So they look for data. They're mostly data-centric. For example, if you want to know how India votes, you need to have the data about how people are voted, how gender affects vote, how caste affects vote, how class affects vote, which region affects what, how do Muslims vote. They're all something which you get information from the world. That's empirical. So this comes from the non-ideal part of theory. So there is one part of non-ideal political theory that tries to solve the problems to reach an ideal. Another one is trying to understand the problem as well as problems. Because understanding what they call a diagnosis, right? In doctor, in order to describe a problem, in order to understand the problem, understanding the problem is the first step to resolving the problem, right? So good doctors or good scientists spend a huge amount of time and energy in understanding the exact nature of problem. Because any mistake in understanding the nature of the problem, your solutions won't work, right? So in the same way, empirical political science or non-ideal political theory, so therefore, it is still theory. It's not that non-ideal political science or political theory is not theory. There are theories about how to understand reality, right? Reality is not something that is accessible to us. Reality is not something that is out there to be seen. So if you believe that reality is something that is out there to be seen, then you are called a realist, or pejoratively called a naive realist. But particularly in the Habermasian tradition or the European tradition, or what we call the critical tradition, we know that reality is not so easily accessible. Reality is filtered through a lot of our frameworks, our cultural frameworks, our ideologies, so and so. A basic distinction that the philosopher Kant makes between nomina and phenomena, where so our access to reality is a very complicated process. there's a lot of debate whether we actually see reality or not. Particularly political scientists are sure that most of us, what we call reality is not reality, right? It's reality is mostly our construct of what we think reality is. This is also called perspectivism to some extent, or the subjective construction of what reality is. So particularly continental tradition, or what we call the German idealist tradition, argues that we have access to ideas, and these ideas have are in touch with reality. We don't have direct contact with reality. Our contact is with ideas, and therefore that is why they call themselves idealists, because your contact with the reality is with ideas, not with reality. And through ideas, we see reality. This is one position. And there are Nietzscheans and these people who say that we never have access to reality. All we have access to is ideas. So the postmodern positions are much more relativistic, much more, in a sense, denial of reality in that sense. So whenever we know that as students of politics, we know that whenever we're talking about political reality, social reality, politics, there's a whole debate about what the reality is, right? For example, I don't know if anyone knows the famous Butler House encounter. Must have heard about Butler House encounter. And on what basis do we know what the reality was? Did the encounter take place? Was it a fake encounter? Was it a true encounter? So questions about truth, questions about validity, and all these things play a role in our politics, right? So for some people, it's a fake encounter. For some people, it's a genuine encounter. So ultimately, we don't have a final recipe to say to determine truth from falsity. And that is what today the word post-truth has become very popular. So in order to deal with these problems about reality, truth, social reality, because human beings disagree, right? Human beings disagree, human beings are not agreeing on, forget what the ideal is, but they're also disagreeing on what the real is, right? So, and sometimes it's confused. Ideal and real are working together in some people's thought. So that is where there's a lot of disagreement. People have offered dialogue and deliberation as one of the ways forward to understanding political reality, or what we call social reality. So in a sense, intellectually, or it is because of certain problems at disagreements or deep skepticism towards reality, the solution of deliberation dialogue has been offered by philosophers both in the analytical tradition and also the continental tradition. Analytical tradition is mostly American and United Kingdom, and the continental tradition is obviously Europe, Germany, France. This is where most of political science comes from. This part is the continental tradition. There are also, because questions of truth, are talking about questions of truth, there are three different broad conceptions of truth. One is called the correspondence theory of truth. I don't know whether you know this or not. Correspondence theory of truth says that what you say or what you claim should correspond with reality. This is called correspondence theory of truth. Then there is something called coherence theory of truth. Coherence theory of truth argues that if all the people agree to it, then it is true. I think you can see the problem with these two notions of, these are very famous, there are many other versions. Then there's a third one, what is called the pragmatist theory of truth. There are three broad theories: correspondence, coherence, and pragmatist. Correspondence theory of truth is what you say or utter or claim should correspond with reality. But the big problem with that is, how do you know what you say corresponds with reality? Because if you are talking about reality, how do we check whether that that person saying or claiming is real? Because there is no way to check whether one saying is corresponds with reality, because the very reality itself is under question. Is that clear? Is that clear to you?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You see the
Yes,
problem
sir.
with correspondence theory of truth?
Yes, sir. You have quite.
Another solution that has been called is coherence theory of truth, and there are sophisticated versions. Coherence theory of truth, all the experts, all the people concerned with that agree upon that that is the truth. So there's a very famous guy called Thomas Kuhn, who wrote a book called Structures of Scientific Revolution. So he talks about what is considered truth by science in a particular period is where there is a consensus, an agreement among all the scientists that that is truth or that is science. Okay? But what is the problem with that? With the coherence theory of truth? All the experts or all the world should agree to that it's true. What is the problem with that?
If there is no unanimity in deciding what is the truth, like some at least even a minority is saying, one person is saying, as J.S. Mill says, if one person is saying no, this is not truth, then he will be denied in this case.
Two, all of them can be wrong, right? The majority can be wrong. So it's at one point, apparently it's history or how far this is true, we don't know. People at one point in history believed that the earth is flat, and everyone believed that the earth is flat. At least majority of them believe the earth is flat. So just because all the scientists agree that it is the truth, still it could be that one minority person might be truer than the majority. So therefore, this coherence theory of truth has the majoritarian problem, and also that all of us can falsely believe that it is true, but truth could be something else. So, and then there is something called a pragmatistic notion of theory of truth, which is coming from the philosophy called pragmatism. Very famously is John Dewey, Jameson, William Jameson, C.S. Peirce. In India, for example, someone like Ambedkar is a student of John Dewey. So therefore, Ambedkar's conception of truth is much more in terms with the pragmatist notion or orientation towards truth. Truth is something that works. Truth is something that is useful. Truth is something that is able to enable you into doing something. Can you understand this pragmatist conception of truth? Is there any doubts related to pragmatist conception of truth?
So any example about it? Can you please provide it?
I was giving this example of, we have sent a kind of a mission to Mars, and you know that there is a helicopter on Mars called Ingenuity. You all know it? They have recently flown a helicopter on Mars. So they've sent a spacecraft to Mars. It landed successfully on Mars, and after it has done, there is something called rover there. We have been sending rovers to Mars. At least this is China has also recently sent a rover. I'm forgetting this name of the new rover, but the helicopter is called Ingenuity. So they are able to fly a helicopter on Mars, and we know that Mars has very thin atmosphere and the weight is very less. But we are able to fly a helicopter on Mars. You know that the signal takes 20 minutes. The fastest signal takes 20 minutes to reach from Earth to Mars. So if you want to navigate, if you send a signal, it will reach after 20 minutes. That means the helicopter can collapse. So therefore, a pragmatist conception of truth is that we are able to send something to Mars, and the ability to fly and get images back from Mars is a sign that something of our science works. It can't be untrue. Are you getting my point? If science was wrong, it would have failed, right?
Yes, sir.
You're getting my point. So the pragmatist conception will argue that if it is working, that means we are getting the results that we are able to fly. Of course, you can be this radical skeptic saying that we don't know whether people have gone to the moon also or not. It's all faked by faked by CIA or these people. But if you believe that that the news that we have flown, the TV channels and everything that are showing that we have flown a helicopter on Mars and we have the results are a way to verify that we have got something right in our science, right? Otherwise, it would have failed. If something has failed, that means we have got something wrong. So the pragmatist conception will say that truth is something not that is corresponding with reality, because we can never check with reality, because that is the very thing we're trying to access. But if we send a mission to Mars, or for example, let us take a doctor. If I give you a knife and ask you to slit a stomach of someone and remove the appendix, will you do it? Why?
Because we are not an expert in that. And if someone says so.
No, what makes you an expert? That is the question.
It's the exposure and experiences, the practical hands-on.
No, that means somewhere down the line, you trust the knowledge you have about it.
Yes.
If you don't trust the knowledge you have about how a body functions, you can't even cut.
Yes.
So that's why it's a very interesting idea called pragmatist conception of truth. But then again, sometimes something works doesn't mean it is true. So there's a problem with this position also, right? Something works, but it doesn't mean it's true. Someone might say, I believe in God. Based on his belief in God, he goes and wins a battle. And basically that faith makes him win the battle, fight, everything. But that doesn't mean that it is true that there is God. You got my point? Or the person claims that there is God. So someone might believe in some jadibooty or something improving the body, and he or she might taking this medicine and they become well, but actually the reason they became well might be very different from. So always success doesn't mean that what you're saying is true. There could be other hidden reasons for why it is there. So I just gave you this broad framework because one of the reasons why someone like Habermas, someone like hermeneutics, other people talk about dialogue and discussion and deliberation is to construct a kind of how do we overcome this radical disagreement about truth. How do we because people are not agreeing about what truth is. People are debating about what truth is. Forget what should be done. What is the reality? There's a debate. So this has gone to such an extent that today objective knowledge, objective truth, objective understanding of the world is today practically not agreed upon by many people. For some, there are this group called flat earthers who believe that the earth is flat, and all that what science is saying is absolutely a bogus thing. And there are other people who believe that Western science is hegemonic and denying other sciences. And this is where we found in the pandemic a lot of so if there is no way to know the truth, one of the ways in which particularly the Enlightenment, the philosophy of Enlightenment believe that a dispassionate, serious, using logic and reason, we can arrive at a neutral, objective notion of truth and knowledge. This was the basic belief of the Enlightenment philosophers, which today is questioned by a lot of postmodern and other theories. So Habermas, which the article I shared, is also discussed very selectively there, comes out with the problem, comes out a solution that one of the ways in which we can reconcile or we can come out with our differences is through deliberation and through proper dialogue and discussion. So hermeneutics, he comes from a critical tradition that also is influenced by the hermeneutical tradition. I'm sure most of you know hermeneutics, right? Do you know what is hermeneutics? Yes?
Yes, sir. The science of interpretation.
It's the science of interpretation, science of meaning, science of, it started as a tradition. It started as a tradition to understand the true meanings of a text. And one of the things that hermeneutics has taught is that texts have the texts have more meaning, or what we call a surplus of meaning, than what the author intends. Then there is the deconstruction of the text, where there are certain hidden binaries that the author is either aware or mostly unaware about the hidden binaries that exist within a text. Derrida's famous book, Spectres of Marx, deals with this hidden binaries that Marx has in his text. So deconstructing a text is to show you those hidden assumptions or binaries that a text has. You must have also heard about the death of the author thesis, where trying to know the context or the intended meaning of the author, we can know by studying the history and then know what the author means. The death of the author is, you don't need to look for the author for the meaning. The text has freedom, which is independent of the author once it is read in different ways. So there are a lot of debates happening. So one of the major crises that the world is facing is there is no anchoring point. There is nothing what we call nothing a priori, nothing something that can hold on all our knowledge systems. Okay, so that means, or what this is also called foundationalism. So the aim of Enlightenment was to base all our knowledge on some serious, unquestionable foundation. One of the most famous ones is Descartes' ergo cortigo ergo sum. So he says that I think, therefore I exist. So therefore, my thought establishes reality. So subjectivity was the foundation of reality. So therefore, Enlightenment, Descartes uses radical skepticism to overcome skepticism, right? Radical skepticism to overcome skepticism. Skepticism as a philosophy has been existing since traditions, right? So the old times. There is the Jainist skepticism, there's the Indian skepticism, there is Greek skepticism. Very famous about it is the Pyrrhonian skepticism. There are many versions of skepticism, and philosophers, political scientists generally are dealing with skepticism about something. So how does one overcome skepticism, right? Particularly radical skepticism, when there is no anchoring point to tell what the truth is. So in order to overcome this, Habermas develops this discourse theory of truth. This is where dialogue and discussion come into play. And this also has implications for students of politics, because most of the time in politics, we are not agreeing on things. So if you don't agree on things, how will we, democracy in a sense is a collective project where collectively we make decisions about our society. So if we don't agree upon something, or how do we do good politics from so-called? So this is a problem that students of politics have been facing, particularly with radical disagreements. Because two people are disagreeing about what justice is, two people are disagreeing about what equality is, two people are disagreeing about what an ideal society is. Then politics is about collective decision making. So there should be some way. So one of the solutions that Habermas, Rawls, and these two liberal tradition, is the idea of consensus. So consensus is a very important value for this, what we call deliberative theorists, where if people can agree upon something. Now the question is, how can people agree upon something? And on what basis people can agree upon something? So someone like Habermas will argue that deep down in our language systems, the very nature of the way we use language, or the way the function of linguistics functions at the much more basic level, there is some, even when we disagree something, we are agreeing on some basic things deep down. So you must have heard the phrase, we agree to disagree. So whenever you say, I don't agree with you, there is some common references to which people are referring to when they're disagreeing about something. So Habermas will say that our language is one of the sources that we share in common. So based on this common medium called language, this language can be the anchoring point in which we can regulate a debate and discussion, and that's where we can agree or agree to disagree. So the emphasis is on agreement or consensus. So Habermas in that sense says that our language provides the basic resources to which we can arrive at some level of objectivity, but this objectivity is not this old objectivity that pure through intellectual exercise one can reach the truth. This objectivity is something, again, very closer to coherence theory of truth, where all the experts who are debating about it can, even though they disagree, can agree upon something. In that sense, discussion and dialogue becomes very, very important, not just for democracy in the political sense, but democracy in the very nature of knowledge, because knowledge is also and inherently should be ideal. Conception of knowledge is also democracy, right? Where no one is imposed a framework which they don't want to accept. No one is forced onto an episteme or epistemology that they don't agree with. So therefore, one of the solutions that philosophers are trying to overcome this at the philosophical level, at the intellectual level, is the use of dialogue and discussion as a way and means to arrive at some common agreement. And consensus in that sense produces a certain level of objectivity. You know what objectivity is. Objectivity is something that knowledge that we can rely upon. So democracy in the political sense all the way goes to democracy in the much wider sense, in democracy in our universities, democracies in our classrooms, democracy at a much more at every discussion level, at every level, a democracy has to be established. Now the question is, what is democracy? Any clue? What is your view about democracy?
When we are free and living with certain responsibility, and also know that there are some objective truths by which we all can live together, sir. So that is some conception of democracy which I basically.
No, but what is democracy? I mean, let us be clear on that.
So description is not possible to give. However, we may put that what are the components of democracy. We may say that there is a freedom, there is a responsibility, there are some objective truths. So these are some of the components which collectively make the concept of democracy. So rather than giving some description of that democracy follows like that, I think we can put certain questions and certain notions regarding democracy. Like certain questions such as, what does it mean to be free? What are our responsibility? How should we live together? What are our responsibility towards each other? Such kind of question could be put into the democratic realm.
No, we can put it in the democratic realm, but do we know what we mean when we mean by democracy?
So that is very famous, that American Abraham Lincoln's the democracy in politics is that by the people, for the people, and among the people. That is the thing I understood, sir.
No, that's what everyone says. It's a quote by Lincoln, but a lot of theory has gone, a lot of debate has gone about what democracy is, what it is not. So it can be. There are two definitions. One is what is called a wide view of democracy, and what is called a narrow view of democracy, or also called a thick view of democracy versus a thin view of democracy. But what is the fundamental value that anything that is a democracy trying to realize? Do you know this?
So I think that freedom is the one of the fundamental thing, and another is justice. So freedom and justice could be put that these are the two things which make democracy a democracy.
So for Plato, he does not believe in democracy, but he believes that republic is a just system.
Yes.
Right. So sometimes just the Xi Jinping, the Chinese believe there is something called a communist justice. So justice again is a very vague word, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But the conception of communist and Plato's is quite closed system. Plato says that. we are moving towards something. But when we have freedom, when our justice is supported with the idea of freedom, then we can call it democracy. And if our concept of justice does not include the idea of freedom, then we may say that it is not, embracing the idea of justice. So when we talk about Plato or Hobbes,
no, are you saying liberty, democracy, justice are interchangeable words?
I'm not saying they're interchangeable, but these are the supporting values which are very much essential for the
what is that we are dealing with when we say democracy?
So I have no idea, but I can say that what are the values of democracy and what are the questions which democracy deals with.
What are the values? No, democracy may someone says democracy may voting hai, right? Democracy may elections hai, but is that what is democracy is?
Yeah,
justice is also very vague word. Liberty is also very vague word, right? You are from political science background?
No, sir. I am a philosophy student.
Okay, philosophy mein to you are even more. Should be serious about if every term means something, right? So, any other one who has any view about what democracy is or what they think? I mean, I'm not trying to test you or examine you, but what's your views about democracy? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it something that is Western or whatever it is? Any other reactions? No?
It is like not the best, we're still kind of vying towards it, but it is one of the best that we've got is what the consensus is largely.
So what is good about democracy? Anything good? What is bad about democracy?
It's very, very inclusive. Everybody is part of it. There's something very good about democracy.
And what is bad about democracy?
It slows decisions down.
Okay.
Sometimes triggers the rule of majority.
Okay. So let me do some basics of political
messages in the chat box.
Someone is saying something I'm not able to hear clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, better.
Me. Yeah. Some students have written something in the chat box. Are you able to see them?
Yes, just a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Tyranny of the masses. Good. Okay. Democracy is the best way to govern people until they find the better one. Okay. Yes. What does prudence theory of? It's not prudence. It's pragmatist theory of truth. So I'm opening it up in a minute. Okay. Okay. So let me give you some basics. It's nothing rocket science. Democracy is one way seen as a form of government in which the rulers are accountable to the ruled. See, in all societies, not everyone can rule, right? Not everyone can rule. Some people are at the job of deciding, ruling the society. But this is the only form of government where the rulers ask the people who are getting ruled, is my rule good or bad? Now, what is wrong with monarchy? What is wrong with dictatorship? What is wrong with oligarchy? What is wrong with plutocracy is that, particularly Plato's this thing is that the king, particularly monarch is not asking the people whether he's a good ruler or not. Okay, so a monarch might be a very good person, an excellent ruler, an excellent person. But there is one thing that the monarch in theory does not have. That is, he or she is not accountable to the people whose laws are being implemented, whose laws are to be followed. You getting my point? Democracy, one of the basic principles of democracy is accountability. Accountability. That means those who rule are accountable to the ruled. So when we're evaluating a democracy based on the principle, whether those ruled are properly giving answers to the rule, because why should the rulers give accountable to the rule?
Because they're elected by the people. They're elected by the people.
They're elected by the people.
Accountable.
But why are they elected by the people? Because they want to be accountable. But why accountability?
Otherwise, they won't be re-elected.
That's true, but why?
Because it is the people whom they are governing. So they should be accountable to them.
Why? I'm governing you or I'm teaching you. Whether my class is good or bad, who should judge? Myself or you? Yourself, right? You should
Yourself. Yes. Us.
It is good for both.
No, but at the end of the day, who benefited from my class? If I tell myself I've thought, well, I've benefited, I have done a good job to myself without any feedback from me, is it democratic? Because this class is meant for you, right? So therefore, you should be judging it, right? That is accountability. But why? That is the question. Why should I be accountable to you?
Because the power comes from the people.
No, it's the principle of equality. It's the principle of equality in the sense, though I am doing this, when I'm giving accountability to you, when I'm being accountable to you, therefore you as a person are equal to me. While in Plato's framework or monarchical framework, human beings are hierarchical. So, or for Plato, there are these philosopher kings. Only they can understand, they can think, only they have the superior capacity to think. So they are not accountable to the people. When I'm saying I'm accountable to you, or rulers are accountable to people, that means we are giving equal respect and equal intelligent respect as intelligent beings. So that is the value of accountability. Accountability deep down is a realization of the principle of equality. That means those who rule are ruling with the consent of the ruled, and therefore with the consent, the equality, by taking your consent, I'm recognizing you as my equal. If I don't recognize you as my equal, will I bother about what you think? No, right? If I don't care about what you think, I will not be bothered about your opinion, right? That's the problem with Plato's philosopher king. The problem with Plato's philosopher king is they are so wise that he doesn't need. So democracy as a form of government is one of the best form of government, not perfect form of government, because it is the only form of government that, at least in principle, it allows the principle of accountability. Particularly, the rulers are accountable to the ruled. That is the basic value of democracy. So so democracy has many kinds. There is something called parliamentary democracy. You might have heard about indirect democracy. You must have heard of direct democracy. So there are many versions of it. But so I'm making a difference between democracy as a form of government and democracy as a value, as a principle, as a value. So when the value is reached, then it is called democratic. When the accountability value is getting realized, then if I'm a democratic teacher, then I'm being accountable to you, right? You can ask me questions whether what I said is right or wrong. So therefore, I'm being democratic. So, but I can have a form of government, which is elections and something, but I might miss out on the main value of accountability, right? The big problems with modern democracies is that there is elections, but there is no accountability. So therefore, you have democracy as a form of government, but it could be undemocratic. That means accountability is not something realized. So coming back to the idea of democracy in discussion again means that when we are debating or when we are having a dialogue, we are treating and respecting each other as equals. That is the fundamental value, because if anyone in the debate and discussion or in the dialogue thinks that they are superior either by birth, knowledge, or gender, whatever it is, then the dialogue is an undemocratic dialogue, because the fundamental principle that democracy is trying to achieve is equality, but more directly speaking, it is accountability, which is an indirect way of reaching equality. So therefore, in that sense, Habermas applies this debate and discussion, or ideal speech theory, because in all our debate and discussion, there is something that is assumed that any good discussion or any good debate should have certain basic ethics, and this is what he calls discourse ethics. And discourse ethics means, first and foremost in all ethics, first you need to treat the other person as your equal, right? Two, you have to be sincere in expressing your views. Three, the other person also should be sincere in listening to your views. And if you give a good argument or a genuine argument, he or she should be willing to agree to your argument, right? Of course, if they have a genuine disagreement, they can disagree with you. So, but basic courtesies of ethics of good dialogue and good discussion is both the parties should consider and respect each other as equals, are willing to cooperate even when they disagree on the right reasons and the right principles, right? So in that sense, this is a democratic way in which a good debate and a discussion should take place. So that doesn't mean that you have to force an agreement. But one of the beliefs of deliberative democracy theories or theories that believe in deliberation is that if deliberation takes place at a very genuine, sincere level, not at a hypocritical level, then consensus can be reached. So most of the time, dissensus, which is the opposite of consensus, is because the speech situation, what Habermas calls, is not an ideal speech situation. Just like Rawls talked about an original position. If you know that there's an original position where all parties come to a contract and talk about it, Habermas talks of an ideal speech situation where parties in an ideally are eager and willing to discuss and debate with each other, disagree also on genuine, sincere. Basic ethics is when someone is saying something, you give them the most sincere hearing, right? You listen to them as sincerely, trying to understand them as to the best of your ability, right? And whenever you are expressing, you are also trying to be as sincere to express your views as clearly and as sincerely as possible. I'm using the word sincere in the sense we human beings are very complex creatures because we have some other intention in mind. We have some other arguments and we are offering. So most of our debates are not ideal debates or what we call not authentic debates because most of the time there is this double standards we are facing. So genuine. So one of the solutions people have offered for ideal debates and discussion in a good democracy, particularly in the media, particularly in the universities, particularly in where people are debating and discussing about social issues that relate to the common, that belongs to society. There the debate should be equal, fair, sincere, and as genuine as possible. And once that kind of a what he calls a public space, he calls a public space, or what is called civil society or a public sphere, the word that he uses is public sphere, where these people come as equals and debate. He argues that in Europe, this public sphere got developed. And so that kind of public sphere will strengthen democracy as a whole. So in a sense, good conditions of debate and discussion promote good democracy, not just within the debate, but democracy as a political form of government also. Because if in a society, good discussions, genuine discussions take place, then the civil society can act as a check to the authoritativeness of the state. So civil society was seen as a solution where it can act as something that is a counterbalance to the, because laws are made by the state, policies are made by the state. So discussions and debate about these policies should be as good, as healthy, and as informative, so that citizens can make better and effective choices in their voting, right? So this is what is still called an ideal speech theory or ideal speech situation. Is there any question?
sorry, you mentioned about Plato's Philosopher's Kings.
Yeah.
But there is a general understanding that philosophers' kings, according to Plato, are endowed with wisdom. Therefore, they have this accountability in terms of people's opinion.
How?
Because commonly they are known to be wise and intelligent, and that's a view of.
No, if I claim myself to be wise and intelligent, how am I being accountable?
Because they are considered to be too good in everything that they do.
Yeah, but considered by whom?
By the people.
But Plato doesn't care for what the people think. Plato considers about what he thinks is wise.
Yeah, certainly. But he forms in terms of the people's opinion, and it's widely accepted.
He's opposed to demos. He's not bothered about what people think because he thinks people do not have the basic resources to judge someone like a philosopher. According to Plato, the commoner has no resources to evaluate the philosopher.
Sure,
so therefore, they are not equals. They are not equals. So even if someone thinks you are wise, that doesn't mean you are wise, right? So in a sense, Plato, the philosopher king, the so-called philosophy class is a self-referential class. It is only referring to itself. It is not bothered about what the commoner thinks. There's a very interesting thinker called.
Pause here, sir. When we talk about the philosopher king or philosophical class, Plato has a reason behind it. And the reason is that he is talking about that to govern a society, we need to have a skill. The way if we are driving a car or we are on the ship, there is a need of a captain, there is a need of a driver. So in a similar sense, when we are governing a society or a state, there is a need of a skill, certain kind of art, which we learn through, philosophical practice, through dialogue and so on, which common people or the, in the lower hierarchy of the class do not know about that thing. So that skill set or that sort of thing makes philosopher a philosopher king. So Plato's reason is something different. He says that if we will give, the power to the common people or to the lower class of the people, they will ruin the whole society. They would not be capable to handle the society. So considering equality on the basis of,
knowledge,
this knowledge, then how you can consider that all people are equal? Equal could be in terms of normative sense, that all people are equal in terms of values, that we all have same worth in terms of living and so on. But as far as it comes into the public realm, that how to govern a society, how to make our society more just and so on, then we need to have a proper sense of justice, proper sense that how to govern the society and so on. So on that basis, how would you say that Plato's notion of inequality or hierarchy is wrong?
Plato is fundamentally, since we are getting into the issues, Plato is fundamentally an anti-democrat. He's the first meritocrat, right? He's the first meritocrat. So once we classify human beings according to this hierarchy, some are more intelligent than some, which is ontologically problematic. On what basis one can say, for example, let us take a taxi driver. A taxi driver has the skill to drive a car, right? So he should be driving the car. But as a customer, he's accountable to me, though I don't know that the skill to drive a car. Are you getting my point? I'm not saying that everyone should be given the steering, but doesn't mean that the driver is not accountable to the customer, right? Are you getting my point? If someone is making decisions for you, then you have a right say in that, whether if you are skilled or not. You are as an equal human being, right? Because you get my point. That is denied by Plato. Imagine the driver says, "Tumko driving nahi aata, I'll take you wherever I want." You can't do that, right? So the driver is meant for you. The driver is meant for you, though you don't know the driver. So therefore, some amount of only the skill should enable him to be the driver, but not decide where you will go. You got the point. That's the big problem with our doctors today. If you visit an average doctor today, he is not going to just treat you about your health. He's going to give lectures about what kind of life you have to live. So this is where the expert is reaching beyond his capacities to guide you how you should live your life. Sometimes they even advise you should marry or not, which is none of the business of your doctor. So sometimes this meritocracy as an idea, which is a classic Platonic idea. Meritocracy idea gives this too much power to this expert. And then there is this opposite problem of some kind of a vulgar democracy where they say that everyone's thinking is equal. A person who is a doctor, a person who is not a doctor, both are commenting on the media about corona, right? Someone who is not an epidemiologist, someone who is someone who has no clue, they're all being commenting. So it's a very interesting that democracy doesn't mean everyone has an equal say, but democracy doesn't mean that the expert will determine everything for you. So that is where a proper right balance has to be stricken between respecting you as an equal without denying your agency. So democracy as a value has to somehow realize this, because the laws are not made. If the driver is going in his own car for his own pleasure, no one cares where he goes. But if he is the driver employing for you to take to places, then he or she is accountable to you. So just like the rulers are making rules for you in your good name, certainly you might not be an expert on law, but somewhere down the line, they should be accountable. At least some respect to your views have to be given. That is the basic value of democracy or democratic thinking. And therefore, public sphere in debates and discussions, experts and non-experts cannot be treated as equals, but somewhere down the line, we shouldn't give overpower to experts. That is the problem with meritocracy, because this meritocracy. So in that sense, Plato is one of those philosophers who believes justice and democracy are two opposite values. A just society is an undemocratic society. So if it is a just society, so you got my point, because Ranjan was saying that one of the values of democracy was justice and liberty. But your favorite philosopher, Plato, is the one who actually pictures them. Something which is democratic and something which is justice are two different. Plato is the classic thinker against democracy, because it gives everyone equal say, which is not acceptable to him. So therefore, justice for him is undemocratic in that sense. You got the point. So for him, an undemocratic justice is possible. For someone like me, something that is undemocratic is automatically unjust. So they are compatible values. For some people, something can be undemocratic and yet be just, which is a problematic for me. So, so coming back to our basic concern about
I have a question.
Yes,
you mentioned in Europe, public spheres got developed in where people could come and debate and discuss democracy, or generally the government and how they were doing. So I just kind of want to, if you could just elaborate a little bit about these spheres, and is it something similar to what we have in India in terms of discussions around the chai kiosk
coffee
or something house. Yeah, coffee house, and in that case also it's usually men. So how can we develop similar spheres in our in South Asia, or does something like a Aurat March in Pakistan come close to developing a sphere like that? So I mean, I just want you to elaborate on what these spheres should look like.
Okay, you want to say more? Somewhere down the line, Habermas in his book, the famous book, The Construction of Public Sphere, I forgot the public sphere book, the famous book on public sphere, he tries to trace the genealogy and the history of public sphere in Europe. And he says that around 15th century, 16th century onwards, these salons started developing and people started debating, and print media and a lot of other things started coming, where people could give up their social ranks and come as equals, including some of the people who were conducting these debates and discussions or running the salons were women. So these kind of spaces got created, and then people debated about science, rationality, and all these things. So he traces a particular trajectory in which this public sphere, much more egalitarian public sphere, got created in Europe. But he says with the advent of capitalism, these public spheres were overtaken by capitalist processes, and money, power, all these things corrupted this public sphere. And today, public sphere is corrupt in Europe too, particularly with capitalism. That is what his problem is. And feminist scholars have critiqued Habermas about over idealizing this public sphere, because although there were women in these public spaces, obviously they did not have the same equal weight as men had. So particularly public sphere has been criticized from the gender point of view, saying that it is tilted towards men. And particularly when we come to India, in Asian societies, our notions about women, our notions about lower caste, our notions about lower classes. In India, most of the public sphere is dominated by elites, upper caste elites. So they tend to spin the debate and discussions according to the underlying values and ethics that takes place. So therefore, what's supposed to be democratic, what's supposed to be egalitarian, ultimately a lot of people have criticized that our civil society organizations or our public sphere is deeply a reflection of our society. So our public sphere is also not a genuine public sphere. It is a very kind of a pseudo public sphere. We can just take an example about the debate that took place about Aryan Khan arrest. For example, there is this Godi media, or what is called pro-BJP media, which went completely blaming Shah Rukh Khan and Shah Rukh Khan's upbringing, Islamophobic, and so. This kind of debate. Then the immediate reaction would have been this NDTV and this what is called a liberal media, which tend to problematize Samir Wankade, the agencies, as corrupt, vindictive. Also, the question of caste came into picture about Samir Wankade. He's a reserved candidate. So therefore, to certain elite sensibilities, a reserved candidate lacks merit. So they were insinuating about the. So therefore, we can see that the debate didn't bring out the actual what the society was thinking, but it was controlled by both the Hindu elite, that is Hindutva elite, and the liberal elite. So therefore, we can't say that the debate that took place on media was entirely democratic, right? I don't know. Someone might think it is democratic because Colin Gonsalves says that if a tribal son is arrested, it takes minimum 7 years for him to get a hearing. But Shah Rukh Khan's son gets within 40 days or very fast in court hearing. So though might be a victim of Islamophobia, but he's also benefiting from elitism, capitalism, and so and so. So that's how. But here he's seen as a victim of Hindutva media. So that's how debates are conducted. So therefore, one of the big problems we face in our debates and discussions is the problem of meritocracy, because only some people have the right to speak. So this is also one thing that Habermas says, that in medieval Europe, only medieval and later on, only a class is entitled to speak for society. So the one who speaks for society represents a class. Only it's a privileged position. Society mein ye kharab ho raha hai, wo ho raha hai. That was only a particular classes. Most of the people were busy filling their day-to-day needs, satisfying their day-to-day needs. So in a sense, talking about society, commenting about society, critiquing society was already a privilege in Europe. So now in India, what is happening is that this privilege wants to be retained by upper caste elites, but other middle classes, others also want to say, we also want to comment saying that the system is wrong, there's a problem with the system. But if you notice our media, our universities, still they're dominated by elites on framing the debates, shaping the discourses, controlling the, in that sense. So therefore, it's fundamentally undemocratic from Habermasian ideal speech situation. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, any other question? No. So coming back to the question about dialogue, hermeneutics has done a very good work about, as I told you, the assumptions about equality is one of the most important ideas. So I'm coming back to this, probably touch upon two interesting ideas. One of Gandhi, for example, is there in your syllabus, though I did not, because if I want to speak about Gandhi, I also want to speak about Ambedkar, but somewhere down the line in your syllabus, there was Gandhi, but no Ambedkar. I don't know what was the reason of
it was Gandhi, Tagore, etc., etc. So you can talk.
Yeah. So, but I would, if there was Ambedkar there, I would have chosen that topic. One of the reasons I came to this was then I will be speaking a lot about Gandhi, but I will want to bring Gandhi, Ambedkar, and John Dewey a bit to make the discussion more interesting, or probably the basic things I've already said. One way in which we can understand the concept of ahimsa for Gandhi is also with this idea of democracy to some extent. There are problems, but let me tell you. For example, in Gandhi's idea of deliberation or debate, in the Indian tradition, himsa means having the intention to kill. So for Gandhi, even if you don't kill, but if you have the intention to kill, you are committed hinsa. So, and Gandhi's concept of ahimsa is linked to his concept of truth. Most of you probably know it. If you don't know it, Gandhi made a distinction between absolute truth and relative truth. Absolute truth is the truth that is there, which is there. God, we call God, Ram, whatever it is. That is the truth. But most of us are, what we have as individuals are particular truths, or what truth in the small t. So what Gandhi would say that no one has absolute truth, all have relative truths. So this is coming from his Jain tradition called Anekantavad or Anekantavada. So that means there are many perspectives and there is no, so this comes from this Indian skepticism where no one has absolute truth, everyone has a limited truth. And how do we reach? So even religions have particular truths, not absolute truths. So all religions aim to reach the truth, that is God, but no one has the absolute monopoly over reaching the truth. If any religion claims that they are the true, or they have the truth, for Gandhi, they are false. And most importantly, what happens when we deny the truth of others? So the fundamental violence that we do when we don't listen to others, and when we are not willing to acknowledge the truth of others, then we are killing them psychologically. And that killing is hinsa. So therefore, for a genuine dialogue to take place, for a genuine truth to be achieved, one has to practice ahimsa. That means one has not the intention to kill. Killing here means killing the viewpoint, killing the truth of the other. So, and we need others' truths because we can combine all our truths to reach absolute truth. So when you kill someone else's truth, you are denying a part of absolute truth. So you are denying yourself by you can combine your truth with other person's truth and all our truths to reach to absolute truth. So by denying someone else's truth, you are practicing ahimsa. Therefore, in order to reach truth for Gandhi, you need to practice ahimsa. Is that point clear? So without practicing, so Gandhi, most people think that Gandhi's ahimsa is not hitting others or so and so. No, for Gandhi, ahimsa is an ethical practice to reach the truth. Okay, if you want to reach the truth, you have no other option except to follow ahimsa. So because we should not kill someone's view or point of view or truth. So in that sense, it is something very similar to the ideal speech situation of Habermas, where a good dialogue, a good discussion should be is to willing to listen to the truth of the other, or it is at least open to the truth of the other. That means you don't need to agree with everything what the other person says, but at least a sincere effort has to be made by the person listening to understand why someone is saying they are saying. So in that sense, in some sense, Gandhian concept of ahimsa is also one of the ways in which a good dialogue can take place. A good dialogue always is willing to listen to the others. Of course, not accepting. Listening is different from accepting. So in the same way, someone like John Dewey, a very famous pragmatist, he also says a good inquiry, a good scientific inquiry, again, is where community of inquirers ask questions to each other, and solve the problems or explain to each other so that they can resolve a problem or they can get to know something better. So therefore, knowledge seeking and democracy are fundamentally linked, or inherently knowledge seeking is a democratic enterprise. A democratic enterprise means all the inquirers are given equal weight or equal consideration into that. So without democracy, knowledge cannot proceed. So now we are not talking about democracy as a political form of government, the democracy that we need in all our ways of life. And this, in that sense, science and democracy are fundamental to each other, are dependent on each other. A good science is inherently democratic for John Dewey. And why I've got John Dewey is because one of the most influential persons that influenced Ambedkar was his teacher, John Dewey. And Ambedkar also believes that our debates and discussions, particularly the media at that time, are not democratic. The elites managed to produce what very famously Chomsky calls manufacturing consent, right? The elites produce consent, they debate issues that are interested by them or the values that they have it. So in that sense, a good political democracy or a good representative democracy needs a good deliberative democratic culture or a good democratic traditions of debate and discussion or dialogue. Dialogue, again, dia means two people, two-way process. And you all know that the word dialectics of Hegel also comes with from the term dialogue, right? Dia means two. So dialogue means both the parties in a dialogue or many people in the party are pushing each other, pushing each other and going higher levels. Like it's like putting two weights, and when you put pressure, moves up. So thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is again the basic core idea of Hegel's is also coming from a dialogue. In a dialogue too, I influence you and you influence me. And this is also a dialogue people have with the world, like science or nature. We have a dialogue with nature. One of the basic insights that Hegel has is what we work on works on you in return, right? That is the idea of alienation that Marx has, that we produce money and money in return is producing us, and that produces alienation, right? So in a sense, dialogue is not necessarily restricted to two human beings. Dialogue can happen between an artist and his art object or the object that he's creating. A dialogue can happen between you and the world, or dialogue can happen between you, a man, and nature. So dialogue in that sense is understood in a much broader sense rather than this. I think by and large I can conclude what I've said. A lot of things probably I missed out. Now we can have a dialogue if you want to. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for this brilliant presentation talk. Now, of course, we open the floor for questions and answers or comments. So Rajan has one. Yes, Rajan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the whole lecture.
Thank you very much.
There are some questions and there are some challenges for me which I would like to express.
Please do.
Resolve. Yeah, there are certain virtues in the public realm and there are certain virtues in our private realm. Take for instance the idea of freedom, equality, and justice on the one hand, society, state, and one more: freedom, equality, justice, society, state, and one more thing on the other hand. So when we try to inculcate them or try to collaborate them, whole of the debate basically proceeded. And most of the thinkers are basically fighting on the notion that how to use these 6 virtues: freedom, equality, justice, and state, society, and individual, society, and state on the one hand, freedom, equality, justice on the other hand, how to collaborate them so that we can provide a harmonious structure to the society. So how would you look at this structure? In what parameter or in what realm you can think of that we can have a proper harmonious structure? My second question is that, like, when you are talking about or when you are emphasizing over the notion of equality, so how would you distinguish between the Marxist notion of equality and the democratic notion of equality? You have tried to emphasize more on equality as a foundation to democracy. So Marx also talks about the idea of equality. Democracy also talks about the idea of equality. So how would you distinguish or how would you contemplate on them? And sir,
wait a minute. I have a problem. I won't remember all the questions.
Yeah.
Can I deal with these 2 questions and probably if you have more, because I will not remember the first question, right? So I have my own. I think the first question was about, I just already forgot. What was the first question? Can you give me a hint?
Freedom, equality, justice on the one hand and individual, society, and state on the other hand. How to collaborate them so that we can have a harmonious structure in the society. So there is these are
so that question is slightly vague, but political theorists have over a period of time offered many combinations and many permutations and combinations and many what we call a configuration of these things. But increasingly we are realizing that we can see these concepts as contradictory or complementary. So I tend to theorize mostly on the complementary side until unless something is contradictory. But most of these values like justice, democracy, liberty, equality are what we call in political science a family of concepts. That means one cannot understand one concept without help of the other. For example, the concept of justice has the concept of equality within it, and concept of equality has the concept of equity within it. So equity was another word for justice. Therefore, particularly in analytical political philosophy, every concept is a family of concepts. We can see them as a family of, one cannot understand one without the understanding of other. So, for example, if you see democracy as a value of equality, realizing of equality, so in that sense they are complementary. Same with equality and liberty. There's a very famous scholar called Ronald Dworkin. He wrote a book called Sovereign Virtue. And in this book, he talks about the most sovereign virtue is equality, because a lot of people argued that liberty and equality are contradictory, because more liberty means less inequality, less equality, and more equality means less freedom. This was a fight between liberals and communists for a long period of time. But today liberals argue that if you're committed to liberty, you're committed to liberty of all equally. So therefore, the sovereign virtue is still equality. So if you say, I believe in freedom, then you can't say, I believe in the freedom of some at the cost of some. So equality is already a value. Then the Marxists will come back and say, if capitalism is producing deep inequality, economic inequality, that means people who have wealth and money power can enjoy more freedom than people who lack money. So therefore, if you're committed to liberty and deep down you're saying equal liberty, that means you should be opposed to capitalism, because capitalism doesn't give equal liberty to all, right? We all know that a poor man might be free, but without food in your stomach, your liberty is meaningless. So genuine substantive liberty means somewhere down the line, rough equality of people. So therefore, all these values have to be balanced and work in a complementary way. In fact, each value realizes the other value. So from my point of view, yes, you can see them pitching against other. Then there is a concept which was developed by Rawls called reflective equilibrium. I don't know anyone has heard this word called reflective equilibrium. You have to hierarchize some values. Some values are very important, like equality, right? Equality, because if you believe in freedom, that means you are believing in the freedom of all equal. So equality is what I believe is a sovereign virtue. So therefore, if some of the values are contradicting with your core values, then you reflect deeper and try to bring an equilibrium back. In hermeneutics, it is used, or in other texts. For example, if, for example, let us give an example, because in a religious text, one part of the text is prescribing inequality, but the core values of the religious text talks about equality, and they seem to be coming in tension. You should interpret in such a way that the tension is lost. You should interpret the later part, the periphery part, in such a way that the tension of equality and inequality is harmonized, or else you have to reject that law, which is less important for the higher important value. So if I've understood your question, this is my answer to the first one. And the second one was, can you repeat the question? Second question was, can you hint at it? I'll remember it.
How do you look at the Marxian notion of equality and the democratic notion of equality? Do you find them contradictory, or in support of each other?
In fact, Marx in his writing, Marx is a very complex thinker, and you also must be knowing that he's a huge thinker. I believe that he has around 30 volumes or so in a library. I never counted how many volumes there are. Marx is a very prolific writer, and he writes about economics, philosophy, political philosophy, and so and so. But one of the things, Marx is a fundamental believer in what we call radical democracy. So we can't, for a long period of time, Marx was seen as an interpreter against democracy. But today, a lot of our latest scholarship is looking at Marx as a radical democrat, in a sense that fundamental equality that exists to all human beings, Marx believes in that. So in a sense, he believes that capitalism or capitalist processes are violating the fundamental principle of democracy. So he wants to remove capitalism to realize true democracy. So we can see Marx as a theorist of democracy, or in fact a better theorist of democracy than the liberals. So again, this tension between liberty and equality, particularly made by libertarians of like Isaiah Berlin and these people who say that if you choose liberty, choose give up equality. If you want equality, give up liberty. Either or problems. This has been kind of a false debate, or some kind of a tension that has been bought by certain libertarian thinkers. For Marx, an ideal society is one where liberty and equality are harmonized in such a way that a lot of other things. So in a sense, I see Marx as a deeply democratic thinker. Democratic in the sense I talked about, accountability, equality, and these values. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. It was really interesting, to hear about that Marx was a radical.
There's a new paper which I've heard just last week about the Hegel Society. Marx has a critique about the Hegel's concept of the right. And in fact, Marx is a believer of democracy, a much stronger believer of democracy than Rawls might be. Yeah.
But sir, in democracy, the fundamental notion is individualism, individuality. But in Marxian notion, there is no conception of individuality. The whole conception is, communitarianism. All people are, have to believe in the commune. So actually, it is quite contradictory. I accept all the things that you said.
No. Yes, it's not a question of accepting and rejecting, but there is something what Marx is saying. In order to understand Marx, relationship between the individual and the society, one needs to understand his teacher called Hegel. Hegel, again, as a philosopher, wants to again oppose the tension that exists between the individual and the society. So Hegel is a philosopher who says that one cannot compromise society for the sake of individual. One cannot compromise individual for the sake of society. So the philosopher Hegel wants what he calls objective freedom, which is different from subjective freedom. And objective freedom for Hegel is when individualism and communitarianism, not the Charles Taylor one, but the interests of the society and the interests of the individual are not at loggerheads, but are in harmony. That is what Hegel believes a good modern society is. So in a sense, the tension between individual and society could be a false opposition. So, you know, if you have a society that sacrifices the individual freedom, then that society is not very meaningful, right? If the success of society where individuals don't have freedom, it's pointless. But if you have extreme individuality and the society is not growing, that again is not beneficial for the individual. In fact, the Hegelian and Marxian framework, the individual is already a we. Hegel, in the Hegelian sense, the individual deep down is a we. You cannot be an individual without a society. Only a society makes you an individual. The hardcore individualist is Mill, because Mill sees a problem that society can impose its standards on the minority, that is the individual. So that is why this hardcore liberal like Mill, so Marxists or Hegelians have a problem with this, seeing that society is a threat to the individual. That's what Mill talks about in Liberty. But Hegel says that no, we can harmonize both the relations. But they will also equally oppose this communitarian fascist logic that society is more important than the individual. So Marx is in a better tradition where individual and society has to be properly harmonized, and it can be done. It's not that it is impossible. That's actually Marx's position. Okay. Any other question?
Yes,
yeah. I have a question which is more practical on lines of this equality, and you know, nowadays we are having a lot of discussion about you know, anti-vaxxers, and so for example, if I am somebody who you know, promotes vaccination, and if tomorrow if I have to have a dialogue on the table with the anti-vaxxers, I'll find it very difficult to believe that you know, they are equal, at least in knowledge. I will of course acknowledge the fact that they have all the rights to have concerns, and there of course there is some sort of you know, there is some sort of pharmaceutical profiteering also going on. So I can understand those concerns, but for me to kind of treat them as equals in terms of knowledge, or to you know, to acknowledge their truth in terms of Gandhi would be very difficult. So how do I, who come with and of course behind me I have my own concerns that you know, because their actions are influencing the entire a lot of other people, and it's also affecting a lot of you know, it's affecting the entire healthcare system and the taxes, etc. So I have my own concerns. So as when I come to that table, how can I be a better you know, a person who's better at dialogue, and how can I, you know, change my perspective to actually have a more meaningful dialogue with them?
See, first let me clarify that neither Gandhi, neither John Dewey or anyone will say that you have to agree with your opponent always. First point, there is some criteria you will follow, right? Ahimsa doesn't mean you accept the opposite positions. So therefore, even someone like John Dewey is talking about 1920s, 1930s. Being democratic doesn't mean that you have a right to go to the nearest doctor. Your doctor near your house will say, "Oh, you are undemocratic. Why are you going to Fortis or some far hospital? Come to me. I'm closer to your house. You are treating me, mistreating me." No, you have a right to go to the doctor whom you think has a better knowledge about your problem or your judgment. So democracy doesn't mean that all opinions have to be given equal weight. First point. So democracy, most people, the vulgar versions of democracy, particularly our left activists or someone like Barkadath, these people will, when democracy, this is a distortion of democracy, that all have to have an equal say. No, experts certainly should have a say because they have made the effort, they have made the sincere effort to understand that. That doesn't mean, so what someone like Barkadat will call local activist and expert, and both are made as equals. That's a problematic. That's problem. So that's particularly everyone's opinions are equal. No, that's not democracy. Democracy means that the judgments, the arguments have to be evaluated, but at least the space to place the argument should be given. Those who are opposite to vaccine, their place to put the argument is given. 1, 2, the same values that apply to you also apply to them. They also have to be sincere. They also have to be listening to you. They also have to be listening to you, and you have to be listening to them, and also try to understand what you are saying. Just like you have a job to understanding them. If it is only you are trying to understand them and they are not trying to understand you, that debate is undemocratic. So that means you are caught in an undemocratic situation or an unideal speech situation. So for that, so you don't need to show your democraticness always. You don't need to be a moral hero or what they call a moral saint. Only in a democratic situation, that means the opposite party is sincere. You think they are sincere. Then you can also do. Otherwise, it is waste of time. You got my point. So you don't need to engage with everyone.
Thank you.
And yet you are still democratic. If they are sincere and they're willing to argue with you, then you are giving it. Then so it doesn't make you undemocratic because you refuse to talk to persons who are insincere or irrational. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's very helpful.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Anybody else?
I'm sure everyone is tired.
Yeah, we're close to 2 hours now. Anybody else? Any questions? Any comments? Okay. Seems no, sir.
Yes.
So we conclude here in that case. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Thank
you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah.
So it was always, as students of politics, we always like dialogue and we enjoy discussions. Part of the reason of one of the perks of being in academics is to have interaction with fresh minds, different minds, and they help you to think and enrich your thinking. So thanks a lot for your participation.
Sir.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye. Good night. Good evening to everyone.